An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6, Chapter 56, Damn the Torpedoes. With the good fortune of a night's recovery, and whatever ship's steward could supply for a hearty meal, memories of some of the grub at Castle Black taught one not to be picky, John found his strength returning in spades. Luckily the sun hadn't been in the sky for too long to burn his fair skin, and the medic aboard ship said the soreness would go away after a week or so. Such was why he was at the mirror in Theon's cabin, trimming the wildness out of his hair and beard. A monarch campaigning in the field did not have time for such mundane matters. The door opened with a creak, ship rocking gently on the waves. It was the young cook's mate, a petite woman with chestnut hair and carrying a tray. "Your Majesty, breakfast." She stopped in her tracks, eyes wide. Turning, bare-chested, John smiled softly. "Thank you." He took the tray from the shock-still woman's hands, setting it down on the table. "I am famished this morning." He chuckled. A bright red blush adorned her cheeks, eyes flickering up and down his torso. "You're welcome, Your Majesty." With that, she scampered off, brushing past Theon as she made her exit. Eyebrow raised, the worn, weary face of Theon Greyjoy sprang slightly to life as they looked at John. "First time I've ever seen her that way." Pulling on his tunic, John plopped into the Spartan chair. "I'm curious how such a tiny little thing is allowed to be on a ship filled with salty pricks. Normally she's as much of a fucking arse as the lot of them," Theon replied, sitting across from the Emperor. "She may look small, but I've seen her punch out men twice her size. But to you..." Watching John scarf down his salt beef and porridge made him snort. "Daenerys or not, women are gonna throw themselves at you, John. Your Targaryen ancestors always kept several mistresses, and many will expect you to carry on the tradition." Disgust crossed John's lips. "Dany is enough for me." There was silence between the two. John finishing up his breakfast. He had just picked up his steaming cup of coffee when Theon cleared his throat. "Yes?" Opening his mouth to speak, the words hesitated on Theon's lips. He finally choked out. "Your conduct so far in the war. You've kept your honour, John. From what I've heard, you've conducted yourself like a true Stark. Lord Stark would have been proud." John sipped at his tea, allowing it to warm his insides. "I hope I have," he murmured. It crossed his mind every day, whether his parents approved of him. Daenerys, Robb, Sansa and Arya seemed to think so, at least from what they said on the subject. "War does its best to destroy a person's soul. I try to remember that, and do the right thing. Sometimes there aren't any easy solutions, though." "You always knew what was right, even when we were young and stupid." Theon seemed to be withdrawing into himself, the guilt and pain of the past gnawing at him. "You always knew the right step to take. It's why you're the Emperor, why the Queen chose you." Shaking his head, John closed his eyes. "Not always. I've had to do plenty of things that scorch the soul. I can only pray it was for the greater good." Fighting his demons, Theon ran a palm down his face. "All my life, I've tried to do the right thing, be the person that everyone counted on me to be. But sometimes, it felt as if they diverged. My destiny, be it Stark or Greyjoy. Father was more of a father to you than yours ever was. Balon was as much scum as Rhaegar was beyond the living realm. And you betrayed him." Theon hung his head in shame. What could he say? What could he deny? Why wouldn't he? He sure deserved it. "But it's still a part of you. Enough left over to rescue Sansa from Ramsay, and to sail to Meereen to help Daenerys." He sighed deeply, willing all the anger at Theon to leave his body. Vengeance and petty hatreds solved nothing, and Theon had paid quite a lot for his actions. "Sansa has forgiven you as much as she could. I may not be able to match even her, but I can't forgive you as much as I can." Looking up at him, Theon nodded. Thank you, John. Pain crossed his eyes. Yara, while I was with Ramsay, she was the only one who tried to save me. And now she's captive in Euron's dungeon or bilge bricks somewhere. Well, brother. John's lips curled into a ghost of a smile, sipping the warm brew. You have a ship, and men loyal to you, with whom you have proven yourself in battle. There's nothing stopping you from tracking down Euron and getting Yara back. Eyes widening at John's cavalier assessment of their familial relationship, he offered a weak smile, one of the few he had ever given since his treatment at Ramsay's hands. Perhaps he could atone for his betrayal after all. Abruptly, the captain of the Sea Bitch threw open the doors and strode to Theon, whispering something to the Admiral. John only managed to observe Theon grow ice-white. Clearing his throat, Theon stood. It appears there is no need to track Euron down, John. Why? John already felt like he wasn't going to like the answer. His gut ended up correct. Because his flagship has been spotted off our starboard side. Without further words, Theon picked Longclaw up from the table and handed it to John. He would be needing it. Drop anchor! With a shudder, the massive kraken skidded to a halt in the clear sight of the smaller ship. Cracking his shoulders, Euron took a look from the spyglass. So, what do we have, Captain? Seems like a small frigate, sire, answered the wiry officer, a tyro compared to the massive bear that was Euron Greyjoy. Probably lost from the storm. It looks like the mizzenmast is damaged. I've ordered a skiff to be sent out. Euron nodded. Through the spyglass, he could see iron-born sailors scurrying about with tools and scraps of wood. Use this time to get some repairs done, and contact me when you find out who the fuck they are. Aye, sire. Aboard the Sea Bitch, morale had reached the abyss. Even as their countrymen were furling their massive black gold sails for safekeeping, the first-rate battleship held itself at a greater intimidation at this minimal distance. All of its menace and glory was before the entire crew. It was. What was dead would never die, but the crew found themselves feeling their own mortality creeping up. For John and Theon, both instantly recognisable to prying eyes, the arrival of the Kraken sent both to the gun deck, out of sight. Talk to me! Theon yelled. How are the repairs coming? The mizzenmast is secure, my lord, came the reply. We should be able to get 15 knots. That's not fast enough, the Fleet Admiral muttered. John looked to his right at the below-deck gun port, cannon withdrawn into the side as to hide it. Our gun batteries, Theon. With an unexpected salvo. Wouldn't work. Theon shook his head, frustration on his face. That behemoth would take at least 10 salvos. With 2 depleted in ammunition to even get 2 out. He peered back out through his spyglass. What we need is Rhaegal, whom we do not have. Are you sure you cannot summon him? Though he didn't see much of John since that first day at Dragonstone, he had noticed that Daenerys had a special connection with her dragons. John had to have the same. Leaning his head onto the bulkhead timbers, John closed his eyes and tried to will Rhaegal to him, as he had done countless times before. But now there was something. A mental block, almost on the level of white noise. Every time he tried to call to Rhaegal, the noise fought back. He pulled back with a wince. I try, but there's something blocking it. I can't understand. The former Stark ward sighed. Well, in about a few minutes, they'll know we aren't one of their fleet. So it was nice knowing you, John. A head popped from atop. My lord, the sails are stitched up and ready to unfurl at your order. Good, I want to be able to move at the drop of a hat. And have our archers prepared to skewer anyone on that launch. Aye, my lord. The sailor disappeared. Theon. John squinted through the spyglass, trying to count an estimate of the number of Marines aboard the Kraken. You know your uncle better than I. Refresh my memory. What would happen if they board and discover us? There was a slight interlude. Well... Theon wiped a sheen of sweat on his brow. After he beheads my men as deserters and traitors. He likely has Yara in there as his personal trophy. Or sex slave. Or both. While nothing much fazed him after what felt like a lifetime with Ramsay Bolton, that did arrive a sense of discomfiture. My guess is, he'll chain you up for delivery to Joffrey. Me. He'll probably rape Yara in front of me, and then rape me in front of her, and afterwards feed me to the sea while using my skull as a drinking cup. Quite the familial bond there, John remarked sarcastically. And then? After all that, all right after we manage to get away and he gives chase, my uncle will send out a series of ravens. One to King's Landing to deliver the news. The rest will go to any Ironborn ship in the area, telling them he's found us and demands that they join him. Seeing the launch heading their way, it would take a while to arrive by oar power, John set down the spyglass. So we'll have an entire fleet swarming our way. Likely faster ships among them. If Euron doesn't catch us first, then yes. Standing, John walked over to one of the cannon. General Theodosius's design was quite simple. Rounded bronze emblazoned with the Targaryen three-headed dragon. The tube did not have a menacing aura. Looks were deceiving. Gears began turning within John's head as he ran through his hand and along the metal. How accurate are these cannon? Theon looked back at him in puzzlement. Can they hit one specific target? Thinking back to the battle and exercises, the Admiral shrugged. Not usually, though my men could possibly do so on flat water and without much movement. Why? What if we took out their rookery? John pointed at the enemy ship. Fire an aimed volley to destroy their one means of communication with the outside world. Catching Theon at a loss for words, he continued, Fire immediately and then unfurl the sails landwards. Euron will undoubtedly give chase from such a slight. And he finally understood. And you call for Rhaegal once we get closer to land. John grinned. And I call Rhaegal. The skiff drew closer, almost within shouting range. After ordering the gun crews to their stations, Theon moved to arrange the deckhands in their proper positions. Look out the enemy. You see that shag right at the aft of the bow? John briefed the gun crews. That's the rookery. At my order, blast it to all the seven hells. You can count on us, your majesty, replied the gunnery commander, half his teeth missing and face covered in scars. He had clearly seen his share of battles. We'll smash it to kindling. Theon's head popped in from above. John! They're here. Lips forming a determined line, he grabbed the crossbow off its wall mount and pulled himself up through the hatch and into the daylight. Finally, the skiff's rowers brought them to the range of the unknown frigate. Someone toss us lines! Suddenly, John, Theon, and several other marines emerged, crossbows in hand and pointing at the occupants. Hands high! Yelled John. Keep 'em up! Blinking, beginning to sweat, the skiff commander raised his hands, the others doing the same. Emerging from his cabin, Euron grabbed his captain by the scruff of his collar on catching him taking a swig of wine. Instead of taking a trip to the fucking bottle, he hissed into the poor man's ear, maybe you could tell me what that bitch of a ship is? The skiff was just tying up to the deck last I looked. Euron released him, spitting in disgust. Let me see. Fuck you, I'm doing it. Snatching the spyglass from him, the King of the Iron Islands gazed upon the scene that was unfolding. Wait, what the shit? Two men were levelling crossbows at the crew of the skiff. Something the fuck is wrong. Getting another spyglass, the captain gulped. Sire? Isn't that your nephew? Euron increased magnification. Theon? Mother of fuck! He zeroed in on the other man. That's Jon Snow. His eyes widened. Jon fucking Snow! A snarl left his lips. Razorgar! Get the fuck out of here! Jon yelled, gesturing with his crossbow. This was getting out of hand. men iron-faced like the hardy rocks they were born on. Finally, one grabbed at his oar and began paddling. The rest soon joined him. One by one, the gun ports on the sea bitch were flipped open. "Sire!" yelled the gunnery officer from below decks. "We're ready on your order!" "Gods, make us fast and accurate." Already the first signs of frantic life were forming on the Kraken. "Fire!" As close to simultaneously as could be, 4 gun crews fired upon the massive flagship of the Royal Ironborn Fleet. Shooting across the distance from the explosive force of the black powder, the spherical projectile slammed through the hardened pike oak hull and into the rookery. Mere cast lead balls without explosive or incendiaries. The 4 nevertheless tore through the small shed housing the entire ship's flock of ravens. Some perished into puffs of blood and feathers. Others found their cages smashed into kindling and escaped into the sky with squawks and shrieks. Almost immediately, the hue and cry was raised on the Kraken, signallers blaring with the trumpeters, while the boatswain began ringing the general quarters bell. Cacophony heard from across the waters aboard the Sea Bitch. Theon raced into action. "Unfurl the sails! Make bearing 10 degrees south-southeast! 10 degrees south-southeast! Aye, sir!" John peered one last time through the spyglass, as the whipping of the wind slammed into the unfurled great sails, filling his ears. "Good job, boys! Rookery's history!" Grinning, he raised his fist in the air. "What is dead may never die!" The already exultant mood of the crew soared into new heights as their emperor cheered the Ironborn creed. "What is dead may never die!" Aboard the Kraken were chaos. The sound of cannonade and crashing aboard ship sent sailors scrambling around like headless chickens, unsure of what in the 7 hells was going on. "What the fuck was that?" a sailor yelled at his commander. "They fired on us!" "Who?" "The fucking frigate! They fucked up the rookery! Get those fucking sails up, fucking bitch!" That was a lot of fucks. Ready to kill something, Euron took his sword and brought it down on the captain, chopping blow after blow after blow, blood and brains spilling everywhere. He continued chopping away until he was drenched in body matter and voice hoarse from yelling. Wide eyes surveyed his officers. "You!" He pointed the bloody sword at someone. The man gulped. "Yes, sire?" "You're the new captain. Your first order is to chase down my bitch nephew on board his ship. Need I remind you the price of failure?" Without even waiting, he stormed off to his cabin, shoving off anyone who got in his way. Curses muttered under his breath, Euron ripped away the trap door at the foot of his bed and hauled out the contents with one pull of the arm. "Guess who's here, princess?" He grinned, looking Yara right in the eye. "It's your eunuch of a brother. Time to add his ass to yours in my collection." "I can't believe it." Rubbing her eyes for what had to be the 3rd time, Mira Reed stared at the glowing aura surrounding the giant weirwood tree. It had been over 4 times the size of any other she had ever seen. Leaves as crimson as blood, and roots digging deep into the ice, snow, and rock beneath it. How could it even survive this far north? With the coldest winter in millennia hitting Westeros, even the hardiest trees and life forms struggled to eke out an existence here. Edaron leaning as far down as he could to help out his uncle, Bran slowly slid to the snowy ground. Looking up at Mira as she leapt down, he gave her a wry smirk. "After all that has happened, you still don't trust me?" Blushing a bit, Mira shrugged. "I'm not the perfect person, I suppose." "Perhaps not. However, you're cute, so I keep you around." He received a punch to the shoulder in response, plus the glare of a northern woman scorned. Mira couldn't feel too bad for him, though. A smile tinged her lips, considering Bran was normally so emotionless. Even snark was welcome to banish the lifeless pallor away. So, what now? Sensing they weren't alone, Bran closed his eyes. Allowing the mystical energy to enter him, he slowly rose to his feet. It still amazed him that he could. He reached out to rub Edaron's scales. The dragon growled softly, pushing back against his hand, scales wonderfully warm against the icy winds. "Head back to Castle Black, Edaron. Your father will be home soon." With a hoot of understanding, the dragon beat his wings and ascended into the grey sky. Soon he disappeared into the clouds. "Brandon Stark?" Certainty in his aura, knowing what was to come, Bran turned upon the newcomers, or rather, were him and Mira the newcomers, without the same astonishment and shock that his companion had. There were 5 figures, one of them at the head, smiling upon him. "I am Leaf. Welcome to the God's Tree, the place you have sought." You're a child of the forest," Mira stammered. Of all the strange people and places she had encountered, this likely topped the cake. Gazing upon the tiny beings in wonder, height only coming up to that of a boy 8 years past his name day. They were dark in complexion, teeth pointed and with vines and leaves sprouting around their skin. "I thought there were none of you left." Leaf lowered her head, sadness covering her face. "We are the last left, and such a fate it is." Lips closing, she thought better of it. "You shall know more of us in time." Smiling pleasantly at the 2 human visitors, the first in over 1,000 years, Leaf gestured towards the entrance of the cave. "You must be tired from your journey. Mira, why don't you rest and enjoy hot broth? Brandon," she bowed her head to the ground, "the Old One wishes to speak with you at the center of the cave." Sharing one last look with Mira, Bran leaned over and pecked her on the lips. With a smile, she urged him forward into the maw of the cave. Each step sending tendrils coursing through his body, and feeling as if he was wading through a pit of mud, Bran delved deeper into the dank and freezing cave. His breath turned into an icy mist with every exhale. How a massive weirwood could grow and thrive with life in such an inhospitality was beyond rational thought. Yet he could feel it in his bones. The pure mystical energy that swirled around the roots of the tree and the walls of the caverns seemed to seep into him, doubling, tripling his stamina and strength. Pushing aside a set of hanging vines, Bran came upon a hollowed-out chamber, anchored by the base of the great tree. Scraggly roots erupted out of and plunged into the rock beneath his feet. At the center of the trunk was a face. A very familiar face. "Brandon Stark," spoke the old man, the 3-eyed raven. "We meet at last." "Yes, we do." Taking a seat in the bosom of the greatest of weirwoods, Bran allowed the spiritual energy to fade within him, legs giving way. There was no rush of fatigue, however. With all that was present, there was no need to husband it any more. "Any change?" Ollie asked the older man, tears stained with dried tears shed over the space of a day. Sighing, Barristan cast a weary look. "No change." Both stared at Rhaegal, the green dragon laying upon the ground in near catatonia. Occasionally he'd hoot into the air, tone grim and mournful by any objective measure. It was clear that the dragon was lamenting the loss of a beloved one, as despondent as any grieving widow having lost a beloved husband. "Oh, when her Grace finds out," Barristan would have to be the one to tell her, but was not looking forward to it in the slightest. "I don't think she'd ever be the same." Fighting back tears of his own, something caught Ollie's eye. "Look!" he exclaimed, tugging on Barristan's hand. In the most movement the dragon had given since landing upon the desolate cliff, somewhere on the southern Essos coastline, Rhaegal's head was up. He cocked his head intently, as if listening for something. A deep bellow filled the air, resonating outward and almost knocking Barristan back. It took little guess as to deduce the course. "Hurry!" Literally dragging Ollie to the beast, they hurriedly scrambled up, as Rhaegal unfurled his wings. "Hold or die!" The dragon pitched off the cliff, roaring and flapping like his life depended on it. Ollie blinked, hopeful. "You don't think—" Barristan smiled widely. "I do! Fire!" With a resounding thwack, the trebuchet flung a load of hard stone drenched in flaming pitch and tar. Euron's eyes glistened from the flames, a massive grin plastered on his face. Hours on the hunt, playing catch-up with the Stark bastard and his cockless nephew's ship. Rookery turned into a charnel house of blood and splintered wood. There were no reinforcements, but he didn't care. The Kraken would wipe the tiny frigate off the face of the earth. Glancing at his tied-up niece, held at knife point, he blew her a kiss. Fire! Slamming into the surface of the ocean, not 20 feet off the port side, the large catapult projectile fountained water in a massive geyser. Those on the sea pitch, including Emperor John, were showered with the white spray. It was oddly a relief, cooling from the smouldering heat of the high sun. Peeking over the edge, John frowned. The Kraken was far closer than the last time he had looked. Even with their head start, the sea bitch was still far too slow. Over 2 hours found a Euron closing in. "Rig, old boy, where are you?" he mentally beseeched, unsure of whether his child heard him. "John!" He was soon looking at a grim-faced Theon, sporting full armour. "Be ready for battle! I'm going to double back and ram Euron!" "Is that wise?" John was no naval strategist. At least not yet. "We're trying to stall for time." The smile on the Admiral's face did not reach his eyes. "At this point, I believe time is something that won't matter any longer. At least we'll be making my uncle dance to our jig." At least John nodded, not knowing what else could work. "Hold starboard! Prepare full broadside!" Wheel turned as far as it could go, scrambling deckhands putting the sails into proper place to take advantage of an intense gust of wind. The sea bitch made such a hard turn that it nearly capsized. Stabilizing, those on the Kraken watched with puzzlement, turned to horror and rage as all the guns on the fifth rate fired a devastating broadside. Well-aimed shots, though still inaccurate, slammed into the side of the mast of the great battleship. Wood and sail collapsed into the ocean, slowing the ship and causing it to turn ponderously starboard. The port side was exposed, to which the sea bitch took advantage. Euron was no fool. "They're going to fucking ram us!" He drew his short sword, teeth bared in a grin, as the sea bitch drew closer and closer to the slowing Kraken. "Time for a family reunion, boys!" A ragged cheer rang out. Then the ship shuddered, ram on the bow of the frigate piercing the hull. Down dropped the Corvus gangplank, downward spike embedding on the wooden deck. Out poured the Imperial Ironborn Marines, shouting at the top of their lungs. Arrows and crossbow bolts zinging from behind them, covering their advance as they slammed into the Royal Ironborn forces. Steel flashed in the sun, sinking into flesh and spurting blood everywhere. Euron made sure to be at the head of the fighting, snarling and hacking away at his traitorous comrades. "Euron Greyjoy!" Out of nowhere came Jon, Longclaw in hand. With a single-minded determination he charged at the drowned king, beheading 2 men that tried to stop him. The man who had nearly killed his wife and took his children. It was time for the piper to be paid. Steel scraping against steel. Euron bared his teeth, tongue wagging maniacally. "You fight strongly, bastard, but you learned in a castle." He pushed forward with his whole body, Jon leaping back as Euron's knee missed his groin. Just. The bear of a man towered over the Emperor. "I've learned among the dregs of the city and the scum of the earth." Snarling, he brought the bloody blade down upon Jon. Longclaw jerked upward, parrying the blow. "You can't begin to fight!" Eyes narrowing, Jon suddenly spat into Euron's eyes. The drowned king, momentarily stunned by the sticky swill, his grip on his sword loosened, and Jon slammed a fist into the exposed abdomen of his enemy. "How's that for castles, Greyjoy?" It was now Jon's turn to advance upon his foe. All semblance of order and cohesion had fallen apart. Arrows and bolts killing indiscriminately. The top deck of the Kraken had turned into a veritable slaughterhouse as axes, swords and clubs grew slick with blood and brain matter. Attacks became that of personal grudges, similarities in uniforms making horrifying friendly fire accidents common. Burying his sword into a known comrade of his father that had sworn allegiance to Euron at the coronation ceremony, Theon swiveled around and found his sister. "Yara!" Taking advantage of the chaos, Yara had sprung to her feet with an axe from a decapitated marine. Using the blade to cut her restraints away, she spotted Euron and raced to him, hacking away. It was then that a piercing roar resonated over the stretch of ocean. The fighting lulled, noise louder than the clash of steel and cries of the fallen. Suddenly the archers atop the stern of the castle of the battleship disappeared in a tongue of flame. Screams disappeared as the winged green shape of Rhaegal passed over the ship. He bellowed as he banked above, Barristan and Ollie mounted on his back. Eyes boring on the winged spectre with undisguised horror, Euron felt something he had never felt in his entire life. His mortality. It whirred through his system in a split second, the realization that decades of spanning the globe one step ahead of death, only returning to kill his brother and seize the drowned throne, was about to end in a hail of dragonfire. The realization only stoked the fire of rage deep within him into white-hot intensity. Bellowing a deep roar, he charged at Jon, sword bearing down with the power of Valyrian steel. Enough to dispatch any ordinary fighter, Jon was no common swordsman. Arguably one of the most skilled swordsmen in the known world, a reputation emerging along the course of the wars and instabilities since Robert Baratheon's death. All the fury of the drowned king couldn't overpower him. The strength of dragons and wolves long dead seemed to flow in his sword hand. Dragonfire seared the air around them into an unbearable heat, the unburnt halting Euron's frenzied charges and beginning to push him back. Until Euron rocketed forward and headbutted Jon right between the eyebrows. Force pushing him off balance, Jon slipped on a crimson-soaked spot on the deck and fell to the ground. Rhaegal, sensing his rider's pain, hooted in anguish and made for a landing at the rear castle. Only it would be too late to save Jon. Pain burning in his skull, Jon tasted blood. He tried to raise Longclaw, but nearly blacked out from the fire wedged between his muscles and bones. Eyes glancing up, he saw the form of Euron, also drenched in blood, limping around him. "If I'm to burn to death under the fury of dragonfire, I shall at least end the life of the wretched bastard of Winterfell!" The drowned king roared with the fury of the great ocean storms, swords high. Jon fought through the pain, raising his sword hand to block the blow. Only it never came. Euron howling in pain and rage. Behind him, Theon withdrew, dagger buried into his uncle's shoulder blades. Teeth clenched in pure fury, Euron wheeled around with the agility of someone far smaller and ran his short sword through Theon's stomach. Hands darting to the wound, Theon seemed stunned, it all feeling as a punch to the gut as he collapsed to the ground. The delay was enough. Summoning his strength back, Valyrian steel glinted in the smoke-dampened sunlight as it swung true. The blade sliced through flesh and bone as Euron's right shin, severing it completely. Euron collapsed himself as blood spurted from the now useless stump. Writhing on the ground, clutching at his wound in panic, he found the shadow of Jon Snow staring down at him. A complete reversal. "Go ahead!" he hissed. "Finish it!" Face impassive, not granting the scum before him any trace of emotion, Jon abruptly swung Longclaw into a left chop. The head of Euron Greyjoy toppled to the blood-soaked timbers of the great battleship, heralding from an ear-splitting bellow from Rhaegal. The drowned king was no more. Fighting beginning to die down, slowly at first, but tapering off as the shouts broadcasted the news. It was all futile. Yara had won the War of Succession. No grudges held between small folk sailors and marines that made up the core of the Ironborn Navy. Surreal days finally passing, Jon's mind clicked. "Theon!" Kneeling by the prone admiral, flat on his back, and blood pouring from his gut, Jon pressed his hand to the wound. "Find the ship's surgeon!" He put pressure on it, Sam having told him this was the only way to bind a wound without bandages. "You're going to be fine, Theon." "Jon... Jon..." His voice was weak, the life seeping from it. "We both know I'm done." The Emperor opened his mouth to speak, but didn't. Theon was right. There was no surviving a through-and-through gut wound. "Where is Yara?" Another knelt beside Theon, opposite to Jon. I'm here, brother. She took his hand in hers, providing what little comfort she could. Theon's fading eyes bore into her. Do not let Theon's actions fracture our people. Promise you will unite them again. Unite them under the dragon and wolf. I promise, brother. Normally proud and firm, even the indefatigable Yara Greyjoy found tears prickling her lids. Trembling, barely able to hold open his lids to keep the oncoming spectre of death away, Theon weakly turned to Jon. Jon, win for all of us. Jon clasped his hand. I will, Theon. We will. Serenity covering his face, Theon stared up at the cloudless sky. Let us sleep on. The gentle sea breeze. Fluttering, the eyes of Theon Greyjoy closed for the last time, watched over by a sister in blood and brother in life, and soldiers of war. Squeezing his hand tighter, feeling the pain of so many souls lost, Jon found the comforting hand of Barristan Selmy squeeze his shoulder, just as he had comforted his father, as the wails of Queen Rhaella echoed through the Red Keep long ago. Sighing, Jon stood, picking up the fallen admiral's, his brother's, sword from the deck, and placing it upon his breast. The honour of a true northern warrior. Rest easy, Theon of House Greyjoy. Rest easy in the bosom of death, for your honour has been restored, and your watch has truly ended. For the first time, aboard the Kraken and Sea Bitch, but for the whistling of the gentle breeze, there was not a single sound. End of chapter, and hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. Poor Theon. And before I get started on everything else, I am so sorry. I know I recorded and edited and made this video, but I must have just forgotten to upload it and then deleted it after thinking I had uploaded it. But what can you do? No one's perfect, and at least I'm doing this now. Anyway, yeah, well, Euron's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but at least he's dead now. That cute little flirty bit between Mira and Bran is nice. And I like that bit at the end with Yara. Like, even though they weren't very close, she was still his sister and he was still her brother. So I like that very much. And I like Ollie and Barristan being on Rhaegal and them just running to the dragon as soon as he realises that Jon's alive. That's nice. Anyway, yeah, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.